for the press photographers, is anybody wanting this spot? And then right here, the middle.
Whose spot is that?
All of them will be done, right?
What? I just thought
Will be done already.
I can put another person here. All right, I'm gonna put another person here.
You guys will go low, right?
Yeah, I'm only here for when he wipes down. I'm right there. I'm gonna be on the edge of the
Where are you exactly?
Nobody like.
You're right there, but
because I know you guys all care about my 2 cents.
were they coming out over there? At Russell?
No, they are not. There's no sign of it. And I heard that Mnuchin told reporters he would speak there.
Oh,
Can't be everywhere.
He spoke at the White House before, so.
Oh, we did? Okay, good.
Pat's,
He was in the briefing room with Trump, so.
Your Pat. Samantha. He was the only one.
Here?
Yeah, here. He came out of the Mansfield building really late at night at a meeting. Pat was here.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Want me to take one chair and put it down there?
I worked out of Annapolis yesterday.
Oh.
So
Both pictures?
no, kids getting free lunches
Photo composites.
and college students out having lunch together
I have you right
because they're all home from university.
if you want to swap out with someone who's not here, I don't care.
Can I put one more over here? No, stuff is here.
Oh, no, oh.
I'll put this chair right there.
Yeah,
Put it under that chair.
sitting on the rug, there, those are the 3 I have. You can swap out with anyone. You just hand it to me and I will.
The TV is full, right? They're doing full, right?
Okay. Well, if you don't want to jump up, don't go up on here. Guys, you're going to shake, you know.
No, I just
Stay here.
Yeah, no, it's stressful times.
Well, I got the 2 events. I didn't, I got the organizer over there.
You should.
And here. Thank you. Sorry. I'll stop the call. So I've got
Tell me the official.
additional space back here we can take advantage of for those that we couldn't fit in our number.
You get her up there out of the way, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Please. Right up on the top.
That's your seat.
Sparks has ever seen this
What was
place.
I gonna say? That's your 18.
Yes.
You want to move?
I'm Andy. He was gonna do it, but I last
I have
minute
yours,
changed.
yeah. Yeah, if you would prefer to say that both is or.
No, this is good.
I figured that.
Thank you.
We're going to finish it cleaning down the phone. I won't be here. I'll be over there.
Okay.
Just, everybody could just, like, change positions. Just don't all get in one. That's it, simple.
You know what, in a situation like this, I'll just do whatever, I mean, I don't even care about it anymore.
I mean, we're not going to do that photographer thing where we're all trying to get the same picture in the same space.
I think we all have to do a
Every angle,
coordinated move.
picture, you know,
Like,
every angle.
synchronized.
Right, we'll just
Yeah,
pick,
exactly.
at one point, we'll all.
All
like,
switch
musical-
to the next
musical
It's like
chairs.
musical chairs. It's
Yeah,
actually.
and then also to the next seat.
We'll
Rotate.
let him say a sentence, and then we'll have to find a new place.
Yeah.
That's what we did the debate. We had musical chairs. Chairs were sitting and we were rotating.
Oh, nice.
It was very simple.
How many photographers?
Just the tight pool and then it was like 4. And then
We need the potato masher flashes though.
Louis up with the art.
Where did he get the information for this?
Is there any coronavirus up there?
He brought it.
But I wonder if it lives up there.
First one, third one in, all the way by the line. Right there, yep, thank you.
Da, 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 da.
Although I will say it seems like every press conference
Oh my God, yes.
You notice that?
And the
Yes.
chicken wingers. So I can always, I can always say, oh yeah, rookie, because it's always the chicken wingers,
Yeah.
the ones that do that.
Steve Crowley must be there. I've heard it say.
And then, yeah, Steve, he is a chicken winger, and he's this. It's like, how does he do that?
I don't know.
How I would do that.
Crowley claw.
So much easier to do it the other way.
Hey, it works for him.
Obviously, it does work.
Yeah, nobody's questioning his ability, so.
No. Okay, no spraying on my camera, so if you need to push it back, your little droplets falling. No, you can stay there, but move it out of the way. Here, I guess I'll touch it and move it out of the
You
way.
touch it, move it out. I might give it to myself.
I'm gonna be right behind you. Oh, this is a good stretch for calf muscles.
I don't care.
There he is, he's speaking.
Yes. You got
And
him,
CNN says it's live.
you got him
so-
with Trump, so you don't need him at a podium.
Here.
It was a live replay between the leader and.
That's what they're showing on CBS, all of the great basketball games for the last decade. Enjoyed it.
What about the people who paid extra for their sports packages on cable, and now there's no sports?
So you're asking
I
your
had tickets
friend?
for 2 Nationals games that aren't gonna be played.
The same people that pay for their kids' college dorms,
How are they gonna work that all out?
you're just SOL.
Some schools are waiving it
Well, that's nice. That's good to hear.
for like dorm rooms and stuff. I've read some schools
For
are
like the fall.
are just like for the they're like prorating whatever the
But you're like, reading that stuff. I remember when I was
giving
in
people
college,
credit.
you didn't get that.
Done and get paid.
The first requirement of any bailout should be that the CEOs of these really wealthy companies have to take a
I've heard that
huge
some
pay
schools are
cut.
waiving.
Seriously,
Well, that's good.
Seriously.
That's good.
like have the
But
same
I-
amount
it's
of pay
obviously
for
gonna
the
be
year
paid
as
like,
their
the
lowest
base
employee.
Yeah. There really should be that requirement.
There should be no CEO with $7 million in one year.
And 7 million's nothing,
Yeah.
between their stock options and all that stuff.
Fucking having a meltdown.
What is the new virus testing authority for states? They can develop their own?
It's all about the AC votes. So they're not really insuring all the stuff like that. You put them in class.
You can buy some testing kits from Jim Baker,
And silver cures it.
Silver Cure.
What? Oh. We're on that path like Italy. So, I photographed a university student who went to University of West Virginia, whatever. I'm like, oh, you're from the ones, you went to school in the state that doesn't have, he's like, they can't afford to test, they're not testing. I'm like, really?
Oh, like how we
We're not surprised.
Yeah, I mean both.
Yeah, and I'm sure they love it, the fact that like, we don't have any, but then, it could be that everybody in West Virginia just stays away from it.
I did see a meme about that. Social distancing since
whatever year it was formed.
Eighteen
Yeah, it was
seventy-four.
pretty funny.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, wait till they do start testing, they'll find out how
I'm
it's
trying
When do
to
they
taken.
start
figure out
retesting everybody?
schedule, and then my husband just goes, or he works from home when I get home. If that makes sense.
They can work from home usually.
I'm sure just like,
Yeah.
a lot of viruses and stuff. Make sure it's all in my section.
So,
Right.
I mean,
There are people.
I was in at 5:30, so I have to stay till then, and then I'll get up at
I only came in today because I
So,
think during.
maybe you were in the room when I was telling people that, through my whole ancestry thing, I came across a woman whose, her grandfather and my grandfather are siblings, and she has a copy of a letter that was from my grandfather to what would be my great
As soon
aunt,
as this is
who
over
would
in
have been her
file,
grandmother, her mom. And it was, from
individual.
1918, and it was talking about how the Spanish flu was affecting their community in Norway, and that all of my family survived it. But they were talking about all the neighbors who, like, killed it. So I'm like, hey, we had good genes. Like, awesome, you know. But then you worry about this one, you're like, okay, maybe we were good for that one, but this one's gonna hit us
Yeah,
harder.
I've been working on it for 2 years. It's always just kind of been like a convenient for the weekends. And now it's like,
And just
now I'm
think,
really
this is a
glad.
very serious one, maybe it'll become another annual seasonal thing.
Just always did.
They don't get a vaccine, let's hope they get a vaccine that doesn't change like our flu. But I didn't realize that, I guess,
I've done that.
influenza
It would have
A,
been
that's the
difficult
H1N1,
yesterday.
that's just migrated through their system. You know, there's like flu A and flu B.
Yeah,
It's the,
right, so that's
it's the swine flu, it just, now it's just a seasonal
the
thing.
podcasting that we've done over the last 2 years, it's nice to have the possibility of like, having a little place at home.
Doesn't take long to get short.
When we moved into this new house, I really wanted to something I wanted to do, and so it was pretty inexpensive.
Mom, let's
It
go.
was just boxes.
Yeah.
And then I just put
Put this out,
it's that foam Excel. Like the microphone, the stand. They were like, we had these extra, like when we redid our studios in DC a couple years ago. I asked if I could take one of the mics from the studio.
Yeah.
They were like, if you want it. I was like, yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah, it's perfect.
It worked out well. The congresswoman was glad that I was socialized. Because I told her, I'm like, I'm in my basement, so if we have a technical hiccup, just stay with us, because this is entirely dependent on our Wi-Fi holding us throughout the interview. That's fun though. Tomorrow will be more challenging with both me and my wife working from home. I'm trying to homeschool with the family.
Well, it's funny, we had one on the school thing set yesterday, schedule, and then we opened the packet, and it was like, don't do University of Florida school after spring break, because after math week.
Oh,
But
really?
my kids were like, we wanna do it anyway, and they were like all into the homeschool schedule yesterday, so they're not into it.
Yeah, yesterday Daniel was like, all right, here's when we do math, and like, we kind of wanted to keep it very much like a schedule at school.
We did a math.
And we did,
Literacy.
and then this morning,
People can be shook
this morning, we just went to sleep. So when I left the house this morning.
I know, and I said this when I was
But you're still being paid from home.
Yes, well, we were instructed.
I think they just don't.
We got word from the online to not answer Bobby calls.
He just didn't want to be school.
Got it, got it.
Oh, get it.
So just I know I'm too tired, he would lay down on the couch like this.
I understand, like, you know, he doesn't get a test results for granted. He said,
Now hanging over at the.
Oh, so they're now trying to play down the need for testing because they find out so badly?
yeah, what, did you say that? I mean, you don't need to have to try to.
I was taking more than once a month.
Oh, yeah.
You have a
I don't have.
Yeah, no, you're flying.
All this uncertainty,
China, Italy, and France are all saying you're flying blind if you can't test your population.
and all this uncertainty, I don't even know whether I am completely.
home and
I mean,
home. And then he calls again.
we called it, but just think
Yeah.
about it, you know, you come through, you use your elbows for everything, you come in, but then you like go to the bathroom, but then you need to close the slider, and then you know, and then you wash your hands, but then you touch, I mean, you touch stuff all the time that you're like, and then you know what I mean? You don't even realize it, right? Like you got to do the edge of your glasses
No,
every time.
I
You know-
try very hard not to do that, and
Right.
also,
I was
my,
like, all I do
my
is
rules
itch
is
now.
like,
It's like,
Oh, I
got
know.
stress.
It's like if you find out
my
your
rules
child
are
that
like,
likes,
every
you're like,
time I go indoor, every time I get into my car, I, hand sanitizer, you know?
Right.
Yeah, but, I mean,
You got hand sanitizer.
It's just like, like, school ended, like, the flood hit like the first week of
Oh, I
April,
know,
and
but
that was it.
that's just information. So
hey,
what-
sorry, there's no room. I think they called, yeah. I'm happy to touch you.
So like Alex, right, what I realized is, I'm just playing with this, right? I'm not hand sanitizer, so every time I'm just flush and if I touch the ground.
Well, what you have to do is get a shirt made out of hand sanitizer. And just,
Are we doing this?
I don't know, where is it?
I don't know. Have they come to an agreement on something?
Probably not. Jeff is over
They just
there.
like their lunch.
I know, it's the same Tuesday deal, but they
They
should.
like to eat, man. Now, Mnuchin is in there, so I guess they're just probably peppering him with questions.
Well, who set the policy?
I believe Mnuchin is running the country. That's my
Great.
impression. They need somebody in charge, right?
Can it be Anthony Fauci?
Well, I think maybe they're splitting it up.
We don't need that, we need one
We need one guy.
singular voice.
He's a youthful 79.
I'm here on behalf of radio, I'm the radio pool.
Radio pool.
And how old is he? 62?
Alright, so we're gonna rely on you.
No, Mnuchin, I think by their standards, is actually pretty young. I don't know what he is, but he's, I don't think he's, I mean, in that administration, he's definitely on the young side.
Yeah. Well, any of
But
the
what note,
responses.
what note does he need to go out, the thing's coming out live?
He's 56.
We usually send it.
57, okay.
Yeah, by that standard,
A
that's,
millennial speakers got to before
Siri.
a Gen Xers.
I'll save you.
but definitely, he's on the young
Can
side.
you monitor your feed?
Pence is not the
Yeah, we
looks
can.
older than he is.
I have one for Greg, like today, and if we have space later. I just told him I'd call.
For a while there, when Trump and Pence were both with the Missouri,
Right, yeah.
maybe there should be a president. Pence is
we'll watch it too. I mean, it's not rocket
Yeah. Yeah, because I will give away.
He left that gig over there. Mnuchin's there. Why are there strikers out? Yeah, once he gets to the
have going on?
Well, we can only control this room.
This is a clean room.
The hallways don't, but you're working.
That's right. The gathering is more than 10.
Gathering more than 10, it's a million.
Well, it's also 6 feet apart, I think.
Are they? What? Do you wanna move it? Yeah, that's fine.
Couple standing up there, maybe.
I don't care.
But I wanna hold those for the last minute.
I texted people and they've said they're on their way for our guys, so I only have Washington Post, Times, and USA Today left. And supposedly they're on their way over, and if they're not, at some point we can push people, you know, as long as they can get in if they need to, and you wanna move someone in front, and that's fine.
I can.
Yeah. Jane S.
Got me cough then.
Yeah, we can still hang out back there, and for some reason people don't show up, I don't think it's.
I can do,
There.
I do two white guys.
They're-
McConnell staff on the beat, I'm not sure if I do this with them. And if you want, I might not look earlier than, but that would be staging the
I'm
meeting.
not telling you to do anything that
But
I'm
yes.
supposed to do. I'm just waiting to
I
see what happens.
Me too.
Thank you.
Because I really want some candy right about now. I don't know where it is.
Nope, nope, nope.
I will be having to go.
There's some mints, I can get you guys some mints if you need them.
That would be nice. Love that.
How much is $1,000 a month for every American? Indefinitely.
Yeah.
Somewhere Andrew Yang's like, I told you.
He was just so sweet.
Oh, was he?
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
so- so-
tweeted.
so- check it out later.
Oh, he was talking about, is it $1,000?
Yeah.
Yeah, Andrew Yang's like, hey, remember me?
Schumer's coming after that.
Yeah, so I,
The guy's entire campaign, not a Republican strategy.
Not a
Republican strategy.
It's
I'm
incredible.
so like now.
Jeff said this lunch was
Well,
still
Mark
going
was-
strong over there, but a lot of members are still in. So I don't know if Tom left there.
Well, they've got a lot of shit to figure out. Maybe that's why they
He
didn't
should get back in the race.
Hey, Mark. Do we know about the vote yet?
I don't know if we got this.
Just
Did
Jordan.
we get the packages from the house?
Yeah, they'll put it in the dishwasher.
We didn't get it from the house yet, did we, on the bill?
Well, I like this better than the Sunday.
Yeah. Well, literally, the label came off. I like it.
Unless there's-
It's on the floor.
Were they supposed to-
Okay.
I got a box, I got a box from,
Anything to keep us here.
from Gombert's dad, oh, 2 of these.
And that's true on the moment.
If it'll be voted on today, now we can, hopefully we'll find out.
That's what McConnell does.
Here,
wants them to combine them.
All kinds of stuff, we work on the school district, and that kind of thing, right? So they probably got the contract.
Well, if they add $800 billion to the bill, they're gonna have to come back.
Yeah, is that what it would be for 1,000 every month?
No, that's just part of, that was what Republicans did. The White House plan is much more extensive. Yeah, of course. This is more than the Obama stimulus.
Thank you. Alex, I sent you a text about that. Nothing important.
The shovel-ready stimulus.
Nothing important.
It's more than that.
Somebody made an adapter for those cameras.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the Crapo, Leanne and I were talking about that. Where are you gonna spend $1,000 a month?
You're right, they're like.
But they don't, that doesn't stimulate the economy.
It will when I spend it in a year, they're going to go to Europe.
Well, that stimulates the European economy.
Yeah, and the global economy, which is all connected.
You're not helping at all.
Senator Zuckerman.
Anybody remember people to spend money now? And unless you're spending $1,000 a month on Uber Eats, now it's $1,000 a month on Uber Eats, which I may start doing, then it's not good.
No, grocery store.
My wife went to the grocery store at 5 o'clock this year. Just quickly, she was like, I don't know what it's
How was it?
She said there were crowds. She said it was pretty bad, that there were more people than she expected, and it was slowed down by the fact that they were literally stocking the shelves. It's like, so listen, I had everything.
I know, but you
It's
can
like,
buy
but
those lenses for.
she said there were more people there than I would have thought.
Those old, 6 o'clock models.
Yeah.
Like, I thought she got up to look out, and I was like,
Yeah.
it's like,
If the adapter's like $100, it'd be good, like.
I went yesterday morning, and like,
What?
I didn't know it
Yeah,
yesterday
and I mean, it'd be fun to play.
I thought she was getting, I heard her get up, I thought she was going to work out, and then when I saw like a using this.
I watched some video where some guy tried adapters and what you use the
So I was getting started to work out.
Yeah, it's like a little.
It doesn't seem like anything to go up that fell up and down.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's better, I don't think so. I think it'd be different looking, I don't think they're better.
And us.
Think about it, like
we
the
need to
24/7
decide what
now is far
this
superior than
person,
it is.
I think, needs, because I think that's part of the issue. We're not.
We've all had conversations.
No, this morning they showed that 17 is the magic number for a family of 4 for 2 weeks.
Oh, thank you, Dave, show, thank you for figuring that out, it's so helpful to me.
Apparently, a lot of people in this country don't know,
They'll not calculate that, so thank you to this show for,
providing such useful information.
yeah. All those college degrees, and so much good work.
Helping the hoarder and everybody.
Taking this one.
No,
Just like, oh,
New York Times shows.
we're gonna have this conversation.
C-SPAN, I should show it to you.
I had enough, so I don't need the 5 volts. USA Today sports photographers are gonna go work?
Jeez, literally, or wedding photography.
For the wedding, yeah.
They're really,
That's such a.
But at least they have like deposits.
well, I hope they.
I'm sure they gotta give those back.
Yeah, you can't keep that.
So McConnell's on his way, they just finished the lunch.
None is right.
Thank you.
You can keep it, but it's,
So they gotta wipe
I've been reading back and forth, like a commercial job, you gotta.
I don't know exactly how far away
When
they
is
are
the big
from
wipe
there.
down?
Lunch is over and he's on his
Lost
way.
everything.
It's on his way.
Um,
So you
Is
gotta wipe
Schumer
it.
coming like directly after?
You know, it's 2:30, so.
I'm gonna go with, sure.
That was 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
That just plan just kind of be.
You probably just wait right there.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so I have, you have Jordan, I'll wait.
No, I think what.
I haven't seen anybody, but I assume they'll come in. Like, if your guys, like, if you're in control, you need to sit in that Washington Post seat, just make sure that.
You guys are gonna be a star.
That's all.
I do this for you in the name of social safe distancing and cleanliness.
Mike, did you wash your hands before you did that?
How's that?
You wash your hands before you did that?
Yes, sir. I did. Actually did.
Guys, excuse me.
What do you? I'll go. I'm gonna do it twice.
Full service here.
Yep, I want to get it twice.
Now, if I can get one without all of us in it.
Probably further left.
There's not a lot to work with.
Man, I hope this is the front page of all the major decisions tomorrow.
Probably will be. I've had my moments.
Oh, man.
I've had it before.
I'm watching the post tomorrow morning, like mastering with a rag. I do. I like that. I gotta dig in there, man. I still check out books in the library.
Well, so can we get someone out here then?
Now, if we can just get some senators to show up, right? Okay.
You did a fine job.
I'll come to your house if you think what it'll cost you. It'll cost you.
Perfect.
It'll cost you.
It's never been so thoroughly cleaned.
I think, if you recall, the seal fell off. The first time we used it, it was Senator Kent Conrad. I think was in the studio. And he didn't have the seal securely.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Mastrian.
Okay.
That was a picture of the day here.
Major news story. All right.
There's a guy who knows how to clean. Just kidding.
How's it
Real
going?
quick.
Can I get the correct spelling of your name?
Mastrian. Mic test. Hi, Mike. I'm feeling well currently. This is a mic test. I know.
Last name again, M-A-S-T.
R-I-A-N. Mastrian.
M-A-S-T-R-I-A-N.
Not Mastrian. Not Masterian. Not Mastrian. Mastrian.
Thank
you. All right. Sound check good? Test, test, test. This is a test for the Senate studio.
I got a quick picture of the share ID.
Well, no, because they don't want, I won't, I can't. You do what you need to do, but I cannot authorize you to take my ID.
I got you, I just want to read, can I
type it on here?
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
What about your official title?
Director, Senate
Radio, TV
Radio
Gallery.
TV Gallery, Senate Radio TV Gallery.
Director, Senate Radio TV Gallery.
Director and Union Representative Housekeeping 207.
Well,
And how many years?
I had them clear, I had the environmental works team come up and deep clean the studio and the podium, just FYI.
I'm just proud I knew you way back when.
You knew me way back when, 1991, 92.
Of Radio TV Gallery.
Group house living.
You're the director of the Radio TV Gallery?
Yeah,
Senate
Senate
Radio.
Radio TV Gallery. Olga Kornacki, you know, she would get mad at me if you just said Radio TV Gallery.
Do you have a Twitter handle?
I do, but I don't. I do, but I don't.
Yeah, you're like all of these guys, I know.
We will find you.
What?
Do we still have time before they show up?
It's on the way over.
You know, this here.
We can wait.
We can wait? I saw you filing.
No, I'm not.
Saul's filing.
He's cropping.
That was the most fun I'll have taking a picture today.
That's Saturday.
I know.
Well, you didn't love the animal?
Big job.
saying is do a little bit.
Yeah, that's what I was.
I got the official.
Much harder, yeah.
You figure they're gonna have to do it again for Schumer, right?
Yeah.
Done Schumer, right? I guess, Schumer was supposed to be at 2:30.
Oh, that's right.
We'll just keep going.
Side by side.
That'd be great. That'd be awesome. That'd be the best thing in the city.
That would send a message.
That would be.
I would send a message.
Try to get it plus the bill.
You're not gonna be, oh my god. That is topic, that
Are you gonna get a heads up or,
We got it, now we're like, we're still waiting.
okay.
Yeah.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, by all means.
We just can't ever leave your house.
Compliment them, they had breaking news off the screen for 10 minutes now. It was pandemic.
Yes, you can. You can never leave though. You don't have to maybe lose your life. Prepared to have never been guests. It's okay to go outside around this and stuff.
I did see something, there's a guy drinking in the street yesterday, my neighbor was like 6 feet.
Yes, you can go outside. Just stay outside. Don't make your house there. While you're on, people will be quarantined immediately.
No, go outside your house and your front door opens.
No, you're doing your best work.
I don't know.
I would think it's okay.
Hey, are you in the middle of something? Okay. Hey, before I raise the questions, it sounds like you got a lot to talk about. Is that right? Okay. Well, I just know the time is really tight for everybody, but we said you at 3:30, and maybe we're splitting to 5:30, which means probably, they probably meet 1:30 for me. Yeah, and maybe, I just, I'm not sure. I mean, I'll be able to decide, but before I push for
for us, I wanted to just make sure it wasn't messing you up. Okay. Yeah, I think. Okay, cool, thanks. Bye.
We'll see it right now.
Maybe he got lost.
Here's the other capital. It was a doubler, he couldn't control it.
Keep that on the red line instead of this.
Still be waiting for the red line.
That Dubliner thing was sad, it's sad.
I sent you pictures before his house. Some of them was moving down the bloody.
When I took a picture of him,
Like,
at like 9 o'clock, he said I would have already been through 6 gigs. By this time.
His Twitter account?
Yes, I assume this was someone.
I'm sitting right back.
Okay, too close to the disinfectant plate.
I think they might be getting quotes from him in the hallway. Is that what you mean? Let's get on the time.
I think he's speaking, at that stakeout, at the big committee conference.
Yeah, they're all coming out.
Yeah, but we got the picture of him while he was down the plate.
We missed the hug between him and Schumer in the hallway.
The high five, do you see it?
The elbow.
Oh, great. We've turned that one.
Perfect in every way.
I gotta go back to my.
You working here?
Yeah, that was it, it's working. I did? Yeah. Cool.
We're very pleased to hear the leaders say that they're staying here. Their priority is working on what we call Bill number 3. And we had very productive discussions. The president wants to emphasize this is a situation where we have requested that many people stay home so we don't spread this disease. This is not like a normal economic situation. The government has requested that parts of this economy shut down, and the president is determined. You can think of this as business interruption money. The president is determined we will put money back into this economy to protect hardworking Americans and small businesses.
I think this is moments ago, I don't think this is live. Doesn't say live, it's just moments ago.
Unchanged.
It's live, isn't it?
Sort of a rising deficit that you're proposing $1 trillion package here that Congress should.
I think Congress right now should be concerned about the American workers and small business. You know, interest rates are incredibly low, so there's very little cost of borrowing this money. And as I've said, in different times, we'll fix the deficit. This is not the time to worry about it. This is the time that hardworking Americans are impacted by government decisions. That's when the government has to step up to put money into the economy.
So what about passing the House bill unchanged? Should the Senate pass the House bill?
We're having conversations with them on that, and that's an ongoing discussion.
Can you talk about, what about the airlines, the cargo airlines?
Sure. I've had conversations round the clock with all the airline CEOs, I haven't had cargo, but we've had conversations. We obviously have a situation where there's very little traffic. We want to maintain that although we've told people non-essential travel they shouldn't do, but essential travel, we want to have airlines that operate, maybe on a more limited basis. Airlines have a short-term liquidity issue, and absolutely, that's something we talked about today. I've also spoken to the speaker about that. So we are absolutely part of this. Airlines, hotel, travel, other areas, we're talking about dealing with that.
Secretary Mnuchin, is there any plans for a global economic stimulus? Are you in touch with other world leaders about a global stimulus?
Sure. The president had a G7 leaders conference call yesterday. Director Kudlow was a critical part of putting that together. There was a statement. One of the things they called for was further coordination with central bankers and finance ministers. We'll be having weekly calls of the G7 finance ministers and central bankers. And I think you know the Fed has been in ongoing discussions with their counterparts.
Can you talk about the bills, the direct checks that you guys are proposing for Americans?
Again, I don't want to go into the specifics where we're going to work with Congress on this, but the president wants to put money in the economy now. This is where if there are people and small businesses that can't make payroll because their business has ceased to exist. We've told people in restaurants, don't go into restaurants. We want to make sure that those business owners have money to pay their employees. We're not going to put money in those business owners just for the sake of them keeping it, but we're going to help them with liquidity to meet their payroll. Thank you, everybody.
Secretary Mnuchin there, answering questions from reporters up on Capitol Hill about this $1 trillion number. This is the number that the White House wants the Senate to green light in terms of helping inject this number in the U.S. economy, specifically of the trillion, 250 billion would be actual just checks, cash, sent to Americans in need in these tough times. Also just in staggering the numbers out of Italy, the number of cases now tops 31,000 and the death toll now surpasses 2,500. The country is at a breaking point with hospitals overflowing, and Thea Duncan is an American. She is among the millions of people in Italy in quarantine right now. She lives in Milan with her husband and baby boy. Her son is now with his grandparents during this quarantine, but she first moved to Italy back in 2005 to study and didn't leave. She now runs a tour company, and more than 11,000 people follow her Instagram, Doing Italy, where she has been detailing life under lockdown. And Thea, I see that smile. It's nice to see all the way over there in Milan. Thank you so much for coming on the scene.
Photographers, do you care if the TV's on or not? Doesn't matter. Okay. But thank you for asking. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Heads up.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Let me give you a report on where we are. Obviously, we need to act. We finally got a completed bill from the House yesterday. We need to continue ensuring that frontline healthcare workers have all the resources they need. We need to directly help American workers and families face this uncertain period. In particular, we're examining policy tools to put money directly and quickly into the hands of American families. We also need to move swiftly and boldly in a major way to help America's small businesses survive this disruption and thrive on the other side of it. In particular, we are preparing bold steps to ensure that Main Street can access liquidity and credit during this extraordinary time. So let me outline for you what we've been doing. I've created three task forces among Senate Republicans, each of them tasked with coming up with what could best be described as the next bill. We're trying to reach an agreement among ourselves as to what Senate Republicans and the administration favor doing next. With regard to the bill that came over from the House, there was some discussion about whether to amend that with a bigger proposal, because we all know a bigger proposal is necessary. But I've decided we're going to go on and vote as soon as the Senate can get permission to vote on the bill that came over from the House, send it down to the President for signature, and thus reassure the people around the country that we can operate on a bicameral, bipartisan basis quickly. Second, we will not leave, the Senate will not leave until we have passed yet another bill. And clearly, that'll have to go in two steps. As I indicated earlier, first, Senate Republicans and the administration are going to try to reach an agreement on what we think is best for what could best be described as phase 3. Then, the Senate being the Senate, we will sit down with our Democratic counterparts and see what we can agree to. That we will not leave, the Senate will not leave town until we have processed yet another bill to address this emergency. With that, I'll be happy to take a few questions. Yes?
Yesterday, President Trump suggested that the social distancing may be required through the summer. Would that mean that this $1,000 that's being talked about as far as this third tranche of bills would go on until that? I mean, how long are you planning on giving people?
Well, all of that is things we're going to address in the next bill that we're beginning to write already. The details of that I can't tell you yet, but we know an additional bill of much larger proportions is necessary to meet this crisis. If we bend the health care curve, that will determine really how long this emergency lasts. And that has required extraordinary measures that basically have us in the unusual position of the American government, in effect, shutting down the American economy in order to meet these health concerns. If we can get on top of the health care concerns and bend the curve, we hope that this will be of limited duration. Yeah.
Are you saying that in creating these 3 task forces, you're not yet willing to say you're on board with any single element of the administration proposal so far?
What I'm telling you is we're going to take up and pass the House bill as soon as the Senate gives us permission to do it. Then Senate Republicans, in conjunction with the administration, are going to write a next bill. The Senate being the Senate, we will then discuss with the Democrats what we can agree to pass, which will, of course, take 60 votes. The details of that obviously have not been determined yet. Yeah.
How the administration is talking about as much as $1 trillion, is the scope in terms of the overall scope, does that sound like a reasonable level to you at this time?
The details will be worked out in the way that I just outlined. And so I can't give you an answer, particularly on a large question like that about what the overall cost of it would be. We haven't determined that yet. And obviously that final determination will be made in consultation with our Democratic colleagues here in the Senate. What I can tell you is we're not leaving town until we have constructed and passed another bill. Basically phase 3 would be the best way to look at it. Yeah.
Are any Democrats going to be on these 3 task force? And also, at what point do Republicans become comfortable in spending $1 trillion at this point?
I just said the first step is for Republicans to largely agree on what we think is the best way to address this emergency. And second, we will consult with our Democratic colleagues and see what we can agree to. That's the way we'll go forward here in the Senate. And we'll stay here until we do reach a bipartisan agreement and achieve at least 60 votes to pass it. Yeah.
Comment on the $1 trillion, the emotional.
Back in the back.
What's your approximation for when these checks will actually be in people's mailboxes? Were you given any sort of indication to what the White House is expecting there?
What's the indication of what you're talking about? Timing?
For cash payments to Americans, that's something that's been talked about a lot. Do you have any idea when that would actually be in people's hands?
Well, anything that requires legislation will not be able to move until we pass legislation. There are things they can do on their own. Is that what you're talking about?
I believe so. There are policy proposals for tax rebates, and I'm just questioning if you have any idea when those are going to.
They'll do whatever they're allowed to do administratively as quickly as they can. The rest of it will require our permission legislatively. The first thing we're going to do is take up and pass the bill that came over from the House. And the second phase I outlined a couple of times already. And that's the way we're going to go forward, yes.
Mayor McConnell, can you address this idea that with the House bill, when it passes, there still is a lag time in repaying small businesses for the sick time for their employees? Can you address the concern about that lag time for small businesses? I know your Republicans have brought it up. And then once Bill number 3, stimulus, gets through the Congress, as you expect, or working on, are you considering then recessing the Senate for a significant period of time?
A number of my members think there are considerable shortcomings in the House bill. My counsel to them is to gag and vote for it anyway, even if they think it has some shortcomings, and to address those shortcomings in the bill that we're in the process of crafting. I cannot predict how long we will be here, but we'll be here as long as it takes to pass yet another measure beyond the one that came over from the House.
And after that, do you think the Senate will return?
I can't answer that. Yeah.
Leader, we've been told that a number of Republicans and I guess on the Rules Committee are working on potentially voting from home.
No, we'll not. Yeah, we'll not be doing that. Look, there are a number of different ways to avoid getting too many people together. Just to give you a hypothetical, it's not set in stone that a roll call vote goes on only for 15 minutes. We could lengthen the amount of the roll call vote. People could come over one at a time, come over in small groups. We will deal with the social distancing issue without fundamentally changing the Senate rules. Yeah.
People are still going to the supermarkets and seeing all this, so much uncertainty. What do you want to tell them?
Well, the way to indicate certainty is to get about doing what we're talking about, to see bipartisan, bicameral action. And that will happen on the House passed bill as soon as we can clear whatever procedural issues we have to clear to get it across the Senate floor and get it down to the President for signature. And then we're gonna move here in warp speed for the Senate, which almost never does anything quickly. I think everyone on both sides of the aisle is seized with the urgency of moving on yet another bill, and we intend to do that.
Senator McConnell.
Yeah.
Senator Paul is saying he wants an amendment vote as part of the second House bill in order to let you move quickly. Will you give him an amendment vote?
He generally, well, you have to ask him, but usually he wants to offer an amendment to pay for these kind of bills. He's usually willing to let us have that vote and move on. I hope that'll be the case this time.
Senator McConnell, eventually you're going to have to make a deal with Senator Schumer and with the Speaker, so I'm just sort of wondering why not do that first.
I think the best way to proceed is the way I outlined. Then we'll have a clear indication of where most of the Republicans are, and we'll sit down and talk to our colleagues on the other side of the aisle and reach an agreement.
But is there an importance to send, a message about national unity?
Sure, and that'll be underscored by the overwhelming bipartisan vote of the House passed bill, and by ultimately an overwhelming bipartisan support for yet another bill which will originate in the Senate. Yeah.
There's been discussions over the last year about the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. There needs to be corrections made to it to help retailers and small businesses, change the operating loss rules. Will those things come up during the course of this discussion? And might that make the same arguments come up over again about how bad the tax cuts were?
Look, the goal here is to deal with this emergency created by this pandemic. And anything that doesn't address that pandemic, it seems to me, should not be considered. We're working on trying to deal with this public health crisis, which we are trying to bend the curve on quickly. And anything that addresses plugging that gap for small businesses and for individuals, hopefully on a short-term basis, because if the advice Dr. Fauci and others are giving us is followed, we hope we're going to begin to bend the curve and get back to normal, because the underlying economy before all this came along was in very good shape. Yeah.
Back to my second question. Can you talk about the moment that Republicans became okay with spending perhaps up to $1 trillion? Is it the stock market? Is it the health risk? Like, what shifted among the party over the past couple of weeks?
Well, I mean, I've been through a few of these. I was here at 9/11. I was here during the financial crisis in 08. I was here during the fiscal cliff. We occasionally have these great crises, and when they occur, we're able to rise above our normal partisanship and many times our normal positions, because these are not ordinary times. This is not an ordinary situation, and so it requires extraordinary measures. Yeah.
Is there a role for Congress to play in helping these states that worry they don't have enough ICU beds, enough ventilators, as this spread becomes much worse?
All of that deals with the substance of measures that we are either about to pass or will pass soon, the contents of which, are being negotiated.
I mean, have you been satisfied with what states are getting from the federal government?
We're not satisfied with where we are, or we wouldn't be immediately turning to yet another bill. And we will be doing that shortly. I'm going to take one more because I think we're getting a little repetitive here. Yeah.
You mentioned you had established 3 task forces. Can you just say what senators you put on to lead those task forces?
Yeah, that's a good question. What I've said, you can't have 53 people write the bill, right? So what I've done is pick out groups of people to deal with 3 separate categories, and then I've told everyone else that if they have a really good idea, I've told them how to funnel that idea into that particular task force. Because this is a Herculean task from a legislative point of view to try to craft something this significant with 53 people. It just, can't be done. So everyone has a way to funnel in their particular suggestions to one of these 3 task forces. These task forces will be working with the Treasury Department and Secretary Mnuchin and his team to see if we can reach a Republican consensus so we know where we are. My understanding is Senator Schumer has laid out, to get back to your question, where they are. I'm in the process of crafting where we are, and then that's the logical time to sit down and make a deal. And that's what we intend to do, and we're going to do it before we leave here.
What are the 3 topics? How do you divide them? What are the 3 task force?
In a sensible way. It doesn't make any, honestly, it's not particularly newsworthy. Yeah.
Is there people you can tell us, is there a point person for these 3 task forces, Senator whomever, or you can help clarify for us?
I think you're getting down too far into the weeds. Our goal today will be to try to move forward and take up and pass as soon as we can the bill that's come over from the House. And then you'll be hearing from us as we move along, crafting the measure that Republicans will largely be behind, and then we'll sit down with Senator Schumer. Thanks a lot.
Could that vote be as early as today, Mr. Leader?
Did he say no?
Said would you vote remotely?
15 minutes earlier than the guidance, he would extend it to an NF time.
All the remote deals, that ain't happening. Like 200 years of history of that.
You guys, we're gonna keep the same folks here for Schumer.
Yeah, is it now?
We're trying to get him here as soon as possible.
No, the general idea
Are you
of
gonna
voting
wipe it down for Democrats?
Yeah, actually,
They
yeah.
don't want to be here.
You don't want to mix
about the
Republican,
House
Democratic.
about his threshold.
Just on this side this time.
I just don't have a blue cloth. I have He's coming. I just emailed his office saying that McConnell finished, and so I don't know when exactly, but I expect him very soon. I told him we need a few minutes.
Are those the same rags?
No. I knew you'd ask, actually, so I changed them up. I don't have blue for the Democrats, I'm sorry. Just to stick with the red. Yeah, I know. I think it's... We're ready?
Here, but not Schumer.
Can we give him 1 minute?
Heads up, he's coming down the hall.
He's
Okay,
wiping
1
it
minute,
down.
1 minute, 1 minute.
Oh, they can come in.
Yeah, I know. That'll be a good one.
Right, I wipe off the top. The seal's not gonna get.
I've already whipped my
Oh, the type.
Look at that service. Did you clean
We
us
have
up?
visual. We're clean.
His cleaning the podium was not a political comment.
We know you have a reputation. We can ask them to.
Okay, thank you all for coming. We all know how serious this crisis is. We know it in our states. We know it with our families. My wife and daughter and daughter and daughter-in-law and grandson are all together in my house, each trying to work. People feel worried in a way that they never have in a very long time in this country. Having lived through 9/11, having lived through the crisis in the banking system in 2008, I think people are more worried about the future and their own health, their own economic viability today than they were in either of those crises. So we need to act, and we need to act quickly and strongly. We Democrats have proposed a big, bold, comprehensive package of what needs to be done right now. We are looking first at the medical needs. You can put all the money you want out into the economy, but unless you actually solve the problem and reduce the number of cases, the number of people ill, the number of deaths, none of that will matter. So first and foremost, we need much more bolstering on the medical side. Obviously, we need the testing to work, but we need much more than that. We need hospitals to be well prepared. They need equipment. They need masks. They need respirators. They need beds. We do not want to be in the situation like Italy where there was not enough medical care for the ill people. And this has to be done quickly, firmly, and strongly, and that is number one in our $750 billion package that we have proposed. If you don't solve the medical problems, you won't solve anything else. And there's the problem of the workers getting to the facilities when their kids are home from school, when mass transit is not functioning. How do the people who work in the hospitals, who work with the doctors, who work at the facilities that make the products, how do they get there? All of that needs to be done, and that is the first thing we do in our package. That is job number one, the medical needs. Second are people who are hurting. I think about, in my state, Broadway, and what do I think of? Not the people who can't go to the shows as much as they regret it. What about the people who collect the tickets, who clean the aisles, who work backstage, who are not working and not getting any income? We must do something for them quickly. We must bolster paid family leave, paid sick leave, and unemployment insurance so that the millions and millions of people who are not working and not getting a paycheck can get one. Third, we need to help small businesses. I've talked to countless small businesses in New York. They will go out of business in a couple of weeks if they don't get some help. our proposal mainlines money into small businesses quickly. They need it. And we ask for forbearance. The federal government and the banks should not be able to foreclose on a house if you can't pay your mortgage. And we have asked that anything that's federally backed, student loans, mortgages, which are the vast percentage of mortgages, and small business loans, that there be a 6-month forbearance. They don't have to be collected. Finally, we believe we have to mobilize the National Guard to help. Who will feed and watch the kids of a medical worker who has to go to work? Who will make sure that food is delivered to an elderly person who can't go out? Who will make sure that kids get food who are not going to school and getting their school lunches? So we need to employ people to do that right away, but we also need to employ the National Guard. So our legislation, the $750 billion, which may not be enough, deals with the immediate needs, the people who are hurting for health reasons, the people who are hurting for economic reasons, that they've been laid off, they're not getting paid, they can't work because their kids are at home and they can't work. This is job number one: targeted, bold, quick, strong aid. And that is the most important thing we can do. And I think that is the contrast between us and our Republican friends. They're worried about the big businesses. They want to pump some money into the economy. But if you don't solve the immediate health care and economic needs of the people who are hurt, the problem will just get worse. And the airlines will be in worse shape, and the economy will be in worse shape. So we must do all of those things and do them quickly. Today I distributed a PowerPoint, which you all have, and a white paper, which is much more detailed than what I said. Oh, by the way, on hospitals, if we don't get help to our hospitals right away, the large hospitals may survive, although not as well. But medium-sized hospitals, small hospitals, rural hospitals will go under, they tell us, in a month or two. They need help right away as well. Can't have hospitals permanently closed. So the needs are immediate and strong, and our package addresses them. I haven't heard anything coming out of Secretary Mnuchin or the President to deal with these immediate issues. That's job number one. There are other jobs, and we will certainly look at them. In terms of pumping money into the economy, you can't do it without doing the things I mentioned. The things I mentioned come first. And it can't be a replacement for doing the things we're doing, or it'll be a Sisyphean task. It won't solve anything. And it should be very robust. Very robust. And be able to be repeated time after time if it doesn't work at the beginning. But we'll see what happens there. We're focusing on job one. And one other thing I'd say, in terms of help for corporations, and I know that the President is talking to the airlines industry, he's talking to the travel industry, he's talking to the leisure industry, and we just want to make sure whatever hope we give them, whatever help we give them, workers come first. The vast majority of the aid should go to the workers, not to increasing salaries, not to doing the kinds of things that these companies have done, like buybacks. We would prohibit buybacks. We're also thinking that there should be, if they're going to get help, maybe their employees should get on the boards of these companies. Last time, the government took stock when they gave money to the banks. Well, maybe that stock should go to the employees so they have some representation in these industries. We also want to, so we want to make sure, we want them to pay $15 minimum wage, and we want to make sure that they strict requirements, they keep workers in their jobs, and not cut their benefits. The aid has to be workers first if we're going to help these industries, not what happened in 2008, where the big boys got helped and the workers and everybody else was left by the wayside. So our plan puts working people, average middle-class families first. It puts the health of the country first, and then we will move on to other things. Senator Durbin. Yeah, okay, one other thing, yes, left out. This should be a four corners negotiation with the White House. The plan that Leader McConnell laid out will only delay things. For the Republicans to first stick together and put together their plan, then work it out with the White House, and then come to us, and then after that go to the House, will just slow things down. I believe the best way to get this going is in a bipartisan way from the outset. We have our ideas, they have their ideas, but Leader McConnell, Speaker Pelosi, Leader McCarthy, myself, and the White House sit down and come to an agreement rather quickly. The plan Leader McConnell laid out will slow things down in a significant and dramatic way, and it doesn't start out in a bipartisan way, and above all, this should be bipartisan. Senator Durbin.
This is not just another political issue. We know it. It's a matter of life and death. And today in Illinois, we announced the first coronavirus fatality, a person who passed away while being hospitalized. I also learned from the Illinois Department of Public Health that there was some worry about a nursing home when a person came down with the coronavirus infection, and then they turned around and tested every resident of the nursing home and every staff member. And in the words of the Director of Public Health, dozens of positive tests resulted in that one facility. She told me this. She said, just to let you know, we're going to use up so much of our protective equipment in a place where we didn't even anticipate a challenge. And we are woefully behind in terms of receiving help from the federal government. So I might say at the outset, let us not assume that the first thing we did here, the coronavirus one package that we passed, some $8 billion directed toward medical research, medical equipment, and medical vaccines and such, has done its job yet. We haven't seen it in Illinois. It's been promised over and over again. We have fewer than 500 tests a day in a state of almost 13 million people. The number of people who've been tested for positives really is just a fraction, I'm afraid, of what is truly the case out there. So before we start thinking about phase 2, phase 3, as important as each one of them is, let's get phase 1 right. Let's make sure that the testing kits and the protective equipment is there for Illinois and for every state that needs them. That is absolutely essential to deal with the medical side of this crisis. And let me say as well, it is time for us to pass the second package that passed the House of Representatives in the early morning hours of Saturday. It could have been done, and Leader McConnell knows it, with unanimous consent on Saturday, on Sunday, yesterday, and even this morning. But he didn't move forward with it. Now there are no excuses. He's promised that he'll bring it up, and I hope he does it quickly, because we need to tell the American people we are moving on that bipartisan agreement quickly. There are parts of it which I'm not excited about. There are parts I'm sure the Republicans are not, but it is a bipartisan agreement. And as Leader Schumer said, that should be the beginning point for all of our negotiations on this critical issue. In terms of the CDC guidelines, we hear over and over from Speaker McConnell, or from Leader McConnell, that we should follow these guidelines. Those guidelines call for working from home, which we're certainly not doing. Those guidelines say don't go into a meeting with more than 10 people. I'm not going to count how many are in this room. There were 18 people on the floor of the Senate this morning when we did the prayer before the Senate, 3 senators and 15 others. So we have to understand that this circumstance is unusual. We are not exactly setting the best example for America in how we're doing it, but we have to do it. We have to do it with a sense of purpose and a sense of urgency. We have to understand that business as usual is unacceptable. I agree completely with Leader Schumer when he says that our priority first is the health issue. If we don't deal with that and deal with it effectively, nothing else that we do is going to be of any merit. Secondly, to look at it through the perspective of families and workers across America who are the first line of defense against this pandemic and have to be willing to step forward if they're not feeling well and step away from work, even if it means losing a paycheck. We've got to come through with medical leave and unemployment compensation to make them whole again. I stand ready to work on a bipartisan basis. Let us not make this a 4 or 5 step procedure, as Senator McConnell suggested just a few moments ago. Let's put the principles in a room, put the proposals on the table. Let's get this done and done in an effective and efficient, timely way. Senator Stabenow.
Thank you. Well, we all know this is an incredibly difficult time for all of us, for our families and for the people we represent. And we, as my colleagues have said, are laser focused on helping those that are hurt the most, the individuals, the families, the small businesses, the targeted industries. That's where we're focused. And we also know that we are past time in passing the package that came from the House. Part of that package includes waivers that allow school districts to take school lunch money and be able to make sure that children who usually only eat healthy meals at school have the opportunity to eat. So most of the schools closed yesterday. So did the children eat yesterday? Are they eating today? I mean, this is something of paramount urgency to families and to children when we look at the needs of the food banks, when we look at the WIC program for pregnant moms and children. These things have tremendous urgency. Every hour counts. And that's why we are so frustrated that this bill has not already passed. We all realize the next steps need to include both a major economic package focused on, again, people that are impacted, as well as expanded healthcare funding. And first and foremost, this is a public health crisis. This is a healthcare crisis that we have to address. We need to make sure our hospitals and doctors and nurses and other healthcare workers have everything they need to meet the medical needs of people, as well as the medical needs of themselves in this process. And as we work on the next package, I'm so pleased that our proposal makes sure that we address health care above the neck as well as below the neck. And what do I mean by that? Well, in addition to our hospitals and our community health centers that are at front line on addressing medical issues, we also know that expanding community behavioral health centers is critical, so we're not leaving the mentally ill and people with addiction behind. Medical experts are stressing that people who misuse opioids are at high risk of the coronavirus because opioids impact their respiratory and pulmonary health issues, and they are particularly affected and vulnerable to the coronavirus. So I'm very proud that our package includes addressing that. This is a critical time for everyone in our country, and we are committed to working with the White House. We're committed to working with Republican colleagues to get it right, not in this elongated process that Leader McConnell is talking about, but getting the leaders at the table all at once to be able to negotiate quickly what needs to be done. And let me stress, this is not the time for broad-based tax cuts that mainly help people who least are affected by the crisis. This is the time to help those who are having the toughest time and will have the toughest time surviving this crisis. While the president continues to focus on people who are in the stock market, we are focused on people who need to be able to get to the supermarket. And we hope our Republican colleagues will join us.
Yeah, just one point. We are clear to let COVID-2, the bill that the House passed, go forward right now. It's the Republican side that hasn't cleared the bill yet. I didn't make that clear. And second, I guess the overall point here is we hope the White House will pay attention to some of the things we've talked about, because if you don't deal with the health care crisis, the stock market, which they seem to be more focused on, is not going to improve. Questions? Yes.
Mr. Leader, it's hard to even pick just one or two questions. There's so many about this time. But one, what do you think in general about the idea of $1,000 per person as a form of stimulus? It's something Republicans are talking about a lot. And I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. Are you proposing, or are you open to perhaps a fourth bill after this next stimulus?
Look, we don't know. I mean, This is one of the most serious crises America has ever faced, and we'd like to do as much as we can in Bill 3, but there probably will be other bills. But and on the first point, the main focus has to be on the things we talked about. First, health care and the workers' families who have been put in real jeopardy by the economic crisis. As for just, putting money in people's pockets, it needs to be robust, it needs to be able to be repeated, and it can't be to the exclusion of the things we talked about. Yes?
Senator Durbin talked about the challenges of sort of social distancing when you're
Yes.
in the United States Senate. Senator McConnell said that he wants to keep the Senate in session until this third tranche is completed. What are your thoughts on how long
Well, look,
the Senate should be here?
We have to get this done. That comes first. But we also have to set an example for the American people. Today, we usually have a Tuesday lunch where 47 senators and some staff cram into a small room. Today, we did it as a teleconference, and it worked out very well. And there were only 2 people in the room where I was on the phone with. Yes?
Are you open to the idea of a $1 trillion scope package?
I think it may have to be higher than that. Our package is a minimum of $750 billion, and there are other ideas that are needed. Yes?
Administration has quoted $50 billion for the airlines. Is that a general price tag that you would support?
Well, look, I think we've got to see the whole thing. It has to put workers first. As I said no salary increases. I mean for the corporate executives. And the buybacks in a lot of Democrats' cause, a lot of these airlines bought back their stock, so they have less liquidity and cushion right now. How are we going to deal with that? I don't think the American people want to allow them to buy back their stock and then, without any recompense, get aid. Okay?
What kind of recompense?
Well, we'll have to figure that out.
Mark Warner was floating something like a guarantee of 90% of the workforce would be there.
Well, I think it probably should be much more than just that. That was just one of his ideas. And I would say that, again, it's got to be a policy that helps workers first. Not going to do what they did in 2008. Okay?
You're a previous rules chairman yourself. What do you think of the idea of remote voting, for example?
Amy Klobuchar's looking into that for us. She doesn't think there's a constitutional barrier at first impression, but it's something we'll have to look at.
Leader McConnell just firmly shut the door and said
Well,
that's not going to happen.
Okay, look, I think we have to do our job first in whichever way we do it, okay? That's for sure. We cannot, there's such a crisis here that we are needed to be working and getting the job done in whatever the quickest, best, healthiest way is. Okay? Thanks.